Greetings, everybody, and welcome to City Lights. To those of you online, welcome to you too. As always, we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush peoples. It is always a privilege and an honor to do so. And welcome to Howl at 70. We knew it was possible. I'm Peter Maravellis. As I said, I'm the events director here at City Lights. We are, of course, inextricably connected to Allen Ginsberg and to Howl, and this poem that really broke ground in the world of letters and freedom of speech. Howl has permanently changed the cultural landscape, and the world of poetry, counterculture, politics, and music have never really been the same since. And what we hope to do this evening is bring together several different perspectives on this iconic poem that really essentially put City Lights on the map. We have with us an all-star cast of local poets, editors, and historians, and even someone visiting from abroad. We're very honored. And emceeing today's event will be Pat Thomas. But to offer an opening statement, I would like to welcome now Garrett Caples. He is the poetry editor here at City Lights, and he's going to say a few words to get everything started.
Hey, thank you. Nice to see everyone. Yeah, Peter asked me to say a couple of things about Howl, so this is how I felt about it today. I think the two most historically significant poems in the English language in the 20th century are The Wasteland from 1922 by T.S. Eliot and Howl from 1956 by Allen Ginsberg. Obviously, this is convenient for me as a poetry editor at City Lights to think. But I assure you, I thought this when I was just a poet, well before I was in publishing. By most historically significant, I don't mean the greatest, but rather the most impactful on poetry as a whole. The fact that both of these poets are white men isn't lost on me, but during the period in question, white men were almost exclusively the Americans with public platforms sufficient to have an outsized impact. To the extent that that cultural dynamic has changed at all in the past 70 years, I think Howl has contributed to this shift. Whereas The Wasteland ultimately affirms the civilization that has brought on the agony of its narrator. Indeed, its despair is largely motivated by fear of the disintegration of the social order out of which it came. As a poem, Howl is agonistic, but there are aspects of its narrator, Jewish and queer and anti-capitalist, that weren't as easy for the dominant culture to assimilate. When all was said and done, Eliot quite easily slid into the role of fake Englishman defending the tradition. And while there's any number of mutual concessions made between Ginsberg and the cultural establishment, he never became anything other than a dissident, however tolerated and rewarded even. The agony of living in a culture of increasingly multinational capitalism is one of the predominant themes of Howl, and the shift it represents in American poetry can't be overstated. We often think of this today in terms purely of free speech. Make no mistake, this poem was one of the hammer blows against moral-based censorship. We're now in an era, once again, where free speech is on the line and censorship is clearly on the rise. But so far, the principle you can publish and sell books that might offend certain segments of the population is intact. We'll see how long that goes. So beyond the issue of free speech, I want to suggest that Howl was the death knell of any pretense that any poetry of any cultural significance can come from the American political right. Pound and Eliot were the last two right-wing poets who could be taken seriously as poets. After Howl, all American poetry of note comes from the left, however vague or nominal the position of any given practitioner might actually be. Poetry in America either flows through the lineages of various writers of color or through the lineages of the new American poetry. In that sense, Howell's legacy surpasses the issue of free speech to arrive at a more fundamental reorientation in opposition to the dominant culture. And I just want to point out that Howl, for City Lights, as Peter kind of indicated, Howell's been a small miracle, even as it established, insofar as it established the viability of City Lights as a publisher. And in some respects, it's the reason City Lights still exists in an era where poetry in the United States gets very little attention or support. when the entire publishing industry is in a state of crisis brought on by corporate monopolization and a more general disinterest in reading books, especially poetry. It's a lot to be up against. But Howl is a pillar to this place and helped us do a lot of other things as a bookstore and a publisher. Our founder, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, went to jail for selling it, and his willingness to fight a repressive establishment to give voice to the silenced is our origin story that continues to infuse all of our activities. In this sense, without Howl, there is no City Lights. Thank you. And now I would like to introduce the man of the hour. Pat Thomas is a counterculture historian and archival music producer. He is the author of the book Material Wealth, Mining the Personal Archive of Allen Ginsberg, which is available at the front counter here tonight. His most recent book is called Evergreen Review, Dispatches from the Literary Underground, Covers and Essays, 1957 to 73. It's a pleasure to have him with us tonight. Please welcome Pat Thomas.
So how are we feeling about yesterday's elections? Let's remember that free speech and hate speech are two totally fucking different things. Now, for many of us in this room, it's hard to remember a time that Howl didn't exist. In the same way that I can't imagine not hearing Like a Rolling Stone, or Patti Smith's Horses, or The Clash's London Calling. And the thing for me that makes Ginsberg so special or so unique is he really spreads himself influentially across three distinct eras. Obviously, the Beat generation, the hippies, and along with Burroughs, someone that the punks could really sink their teeth into. And it's great that here it is all these years later that we've filled a room thinking about Allen, talking about Allen. I can also tell you, unfortunately, that Allen has become someone that people like to talk about, but don't necessarily actually read. Sales of Howl are not exactly what they were 50 years ago. And so many of you love to go to Starbucks, or you might go over to Vesuvio's and have a cocktail. And you say, I'm not going to buy a book. It's like 25 bucks. What the hell? And yet you'll piss away on 2 drinks, 25 bucks, and drink them in like 10 minutes. So strongly consider leaving with a book. Doesn't necessarily have to be Howl, doesn't necessarily have to be one of my books, but take a break from Starbucks this week, folks, and buy a fucking book. Bob Dylan and Ginsberg were sort of had a mutual admiration society. Peter Hale, couldn't be here tonight, runs the Ginsberg estate currently, and he has great memories of Bob would stop by to see Allen, and you couldn't tell which guy was more enamored with the other guy. And one of my favorite stories, Allen used to have an incredible Rolodex, and he would get to, let's say, he'd fly into LA and he would flip through the Rolodex, and he might call Ronnie Blakely, or he might call Dylan and see what was going on. And one night, him and Bob are at Cantor's Deli with Ronnie Blakely, and she says, I'm on my way to go sing with Leonard Cohen on an album that turned out to be Death of the Ladies' Man, produced by Phil Spector. And the first thing that Bob Dylan did when he met Phil Spector, he said, you need to work with Ginsberg. He's got words. Dylan said somewhat recently, seeing Ginsberg was like going to see the Oracle of Delphi. He didn't care about material wealth or political power. He was his own kind of king. He achieved what any poet could hope to achieve. I saw the best minds of my generation destroyed by madness. Very few poets have struck society in that way. Robert Frost, maybe? We still remember those lines today. Today's poets don't reach into the public consciousness that way. So it was remarkable that Allen had actually broken through. Those are Bob's words. Now, we also, I want to change topics slightly here. Many of us love to shit on Rolling Stone. It's not the magazine it used to be. They left our great city of San Francisco, and they sold out and went to New York. But when Allen died in 1997, Rolling Stone did something they've never done for any other writer before or since. They gave Allen about 15 pages. Everyone you could think of, Lou Reed, Elvin Jones, William Burroughs, of course, Patti Smith, all had something to say about Allen. And it was remarkable that even Rolling Stone realized what an impact that Allen had and gave him that kind of space. Allen was also very generous. He spent a lot of time promoting other writers. He acted as a literary agent for Kerouac and Burroughs before anyone knew who they were. Ginsberg kicked open an entire new era in American literature while simultaneously demolishing what came before. In many ways, I see Allen as one of the key people who basically invented what counterculture is in the 50s. As I mentioned earlier, by the 1960s, he's embraced by the likes of Dylan and the Beatles. He was great at alienating both communist and democratic governments with his anti-authoritarian and anti-war stance. To say he was outspoken and ubiquitous around the globe would be an understatement. Ginsberg popped up in Cuba, Czechoslovakia, Russia, India, South America. During the 1970s, no surprise, he led gay rights organizations, No Nukes. Punk rock started, The Clash were eager to align themselves with Allen, of course, performing and recording with him. And Allen's politics were wonderful. Go fuck yourself with your atom bomb. Allen was the living, breathing, writing, performing embodiment of be yourself. One of the things I love about Allen is I don't think he ever really got embarrassed. He was shameless. He could perform naked if that's what he was up to, what he wanted to do. He could say crazy shit. He just was really him. You know, most of us hide behind a mask, right? We want everybody to like us. We come up with some bullshit line to impress our friends. Allen was just simply Allen. The other thing about Allen is he could have a dialogue with anybody. One of my favorite moments in the book that I compiled is Allen calling up Henry Kissinger and discussing the idea that him and Henry go on national TV naked and discuss ending the Vietnam War. Another great Allen moment that's in my book, Allen had heard that the American Nazi Party, led by George Lincoln Rockwell, wanted to assassinate him. What did Allen do? He wrote to George Lincoln Rockwell and said, let's get together and talk about it. That's what I love about Allen. The other thing about Allen is he was actually famous for doing something, right? He created this amazing body of work that we're here to honor, right? He was a political activist. He did all these things. Now, some asshole posts a kitty video on YouTube, and 3 days later, he's a national hero. Allen actually did work. He was not some internet junkie who posted a self-serving video and became popular. I didn't really know Allen. I met him ever so briefly, but to me, his public persona seemed warm and human. In a current world of sound bites where we never have a real conversation, where social media arguments between strangers and one-upmanship is all we do, we've really lost the plot terribly. We really need another Allen. Thank you. Now, I'm terrible at people's names. So if I blow your name, please forgive me as I introduce you. You can correct me. I believe the first gentleman we're going to bring up is Gach, who's an author, translator, editor, and teacher living in San Francisco. His work has been translated into several languages, various anthologies, numerous periodicals. He has hosted the Zen Mindfulness Fellowship Weekly for the past 12 years. Gary.
Can you hear me? What a title. It's also a one-word poem, onomatopoeic. Oh. Oh. Tonight, I'd like to fill in some of the background before the book was published and invite in some of the ancestors, right? I'll name 4, and then we'll see where that goes. We can see 4 ancestors present as roots in Allen's writing, Howl. I can feel 4 ancestors present as wings when Allen reads Howl. Uno, Hebrew. Allen, born 1926, learned Hebrew as a boy. As such, he became familiar with its incantory qualities. His own reading style, incantory, cantorial, how a rabbi sings, what he once called hypnotically repeated chants, which Howl is. Check out Pierre Pinchik and Jossela Rosenblatt if you've never heard a classical cantor. The postscript to Howl echoes how Hebrew has blessings for everything. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, the chair. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, the YouTube. But just there's like book after book of prayers in Hebrew for things with this incantory quality. Moreover, 3, Powell is a branch of the prophetic tradition. Daniel, Ezekiel, Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, and so on. That prophetic tradition and Hebrew poetics are keen on naming. The universe, for example, is created through the namings of the one before the dawn of time, whose name is unsayable, unpronounceable, inconceivable. But 5, Hebrew is a language, not a person, not an ancestor, you might say. Oh, but Kerouac, born 1922, reminds us words are Buddhas too. And what Allen did is he made each word a rabbinic essence unto itself. Dos, born 1757, Blake spoke to Allen in his Harlem apartment, and I can see Allen in Blake's long improvisation beginning with hold infinity in the palm of your hand and eternity in an hour. And traversing into omens of social woes, the dog starved at his master's gate predicts the ruin of the state. And concluding, every night and every morn, some to misery are born. Every morn and every night, some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to sweet delight. Some are born to endless night. We are led to believe a lie when we see not through the eye which was born in a night to perish in a night, when the soul slept in beams of light. God appears, and God is light to those poor souls who dwell in night. But does a human form display to those who dwell in realms of day? Trace Whitman, born 1883, in whom we can feel Allen as a young bard setting out. This follows an aria. Okay. the aria sinking, all else continuing, the stars shining, the winds blowing, the notes of the bird continuous echoing, with angry moans the fierce old mother incessantly moaning on the sands of Pamanok's shore, gray and rustling, the yellow half moon enlarged, sagging down, drooping the face of the sea, almost touching the boy ecstatic, with his bare feet the waves, with his hair the atmosphere dallying, the love in the heart long pent, now loose, now at last tumultuously bursting, the aria's meaning, the ears, the soul, swiftly depositing the strange tears down the cheeks, coursing, the colloquy there, the trio, each uttering the undertone, the savage old mother incessantly crying, to the boy's soul questions, solemnly timing, some drowned secret hissing, to the outsetting bard. Quattro. Dr. William Carlos Williams, born 1883, was a major mover in the revolution of bringing plain speech into the circumference of poetry. And to Dot and I, not British, but American English. American? American? In their correspondence, sometime in the mid-40s, he wrote the introduction to Howl, you know. He wrote to Allen, "Don't emulate old masters. Speak with your own voice. Use strong visual imagery. Shift from formal to free verse." Those who wish may join me in his short, untitled poem, probably scribbled on a prescription pad in between patients, from Springanol, 1921, beginning "So Much Depends." So much depends upon a red wheelbarrow glazed with rain and water, beside the white chickens. Emptiness is form. Form is emptiness. So much depends, and so it goes. To open this out, if I may, Dot and I, cross a T, I'll draw on a chart made by Yiddish modernist Louis Zukowski, born 1904, of three aspects of influence: direct, indirect, and ambient. One, direct. William Carlos Williams to Allen, lineage, as B. Whitman to Allen via the queer lineage of Neil Cassidy, sleeping with Gavin Arthur, sleeping with Edward Carpenter, sleeping with Walt Whitman. C. Surrealism. Hydrogen jukebox. As Allen was initiated by Philip Lamantia, born 1927, officially recognized by André Breton, born, etc. 2. Indirect. Dr. WCW's poem Thursday, that's tomorrow, it's written in 1921, shows Allen that an American Buddhism is possible. American Buddhism is possible. Thursday's on my website. I have a copy if you want to see it. I won't read it now. 3, the ambient. What's in the air? Bring to mind the word collage technique of companion William S. Burroughs, born 1914, and imagine cut-ups through all this. Cut up William Blake and the blues. Cut up Hebrew litany and bebop. Look out, kid. It's something you did. God knows when, but you're doing it again. Descendants become ancestors. The pump don't work because the Vandals took the handles. Right? Black Mountain poets and Saul Williams, born 1972, and Anes Mosgani, born 1977, are other examples of Allen's continuation. Four, to bring it all back home, November 5th, 2025, when City Lights published Howl, making Allen Ginsberg a household name, Powell, in turn, made One for Them, The Power of Community Coming Together. Still here.
Gary, that was beautiful.
Thank you.
I took some of my work with you, but that's okay. I still love you.
Party favors.
Uh,
It's this one.
oh,
It's this one.
it's this one. Yes,
Yeah.
there we go. Thank you again, Gary. Our next guest, I had the pleasure of meeting for the first time about 2 hours ago. We had a wonderful dinner and some drinks. Judy, I hope I don't mess up your last name, Judy Halebsky. Okay, Halebsky. Okay, she's a poet and educator. She's the author of 3 poetry collections: Sky Equals Empty, Tree Line, Spring in 1,000 Years, and the chapbook Space, Gap, Interval, Distance. She directs the low residency MFA program at Dominican University of California. Judy, come on up and entertain us.
Pat, thanks so much. Gary, rock the mic. That was wonderful. What a lovely evening.
Yeah.
I'm so thrilled to be here. George, thanks for having me. And I was asked to think about Allen Ginsberg and my work. And I feel that I came up reading Ginsberg and kind of tried as I could to kind of bring some of his work into me physically through what I would call a process of transmission. My earliest writing practice was to read poetry for a long time and then write my own work. And so that was kind of imitative maybe, but also I think of maybe somewhat of that as embodiment, a kind of a body to body transmission. I felt a great kinship with Allen Ginsberg because my father grew up in the same community as him in New York City, involved in the labor movement, and how Ginsberg writes about like protesting the narcotic tobacco haze of capitalism. And my father used to say, like, capitalism never gave us anything, meaning like the weekend, safety protocols, working conditions, like every part of that we fought for. And no matter how successful a business was, workers had to fight for their conditions. I grew up in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and some of you might know that Allen Ginsberg practiced Buddhism, and he was in the Shambhala Buddhist community, right, following Trungpa Rinpoche as it came through San Francisco, and that community became established in Boulder, Colorado, and later moved to Halifax, Nova Scotia. So I grew up, you're familiar with the Dharma bums. I grew up friends with the Dharma brats. Which were like the kids, like the first generation of American-born Buddhists in that community. So when Allen Ginsberg passed away, a friend of mine in that community called me that day to tell me that he passed away. And I have dug up the poem I wrote that day on April 5th, 1997. I had to physically go in person to the Mills College Library and take a picture of it out of my MFA thesis. So I'm going to share it with you now. I wanted to read it exactly the way it was, but I couldn't help making a few slight revisions. It's titled "You Were David." In this concrete San Francisco, blue sky, city stop at midnight, all the square sidewalks and you. Following Rinpoche, steeped in the Torah, the Heart Sutra, and Moloch and Rose and Patterson, New Jersey. My communist father has Ginsberg sympathies. Ginsberg drunk in the shrine room, Ginsberg driving Green Mountain roads in Colorado, Ginsberg by flashlight in a tent in Montana, on Bridge Street, at Arapahoe and 3rd, in bed at dawn, in America when fury is bellowing, holy blood, holy salt, sweat, holy blue America. 3 years older than my father, you were supposed to be a lawyer, remember? Before the unimaginable poetic of lion hallucinations, masturbations, the cut down under the nerve, tendon, pulse of politics in Cuba, Nicaragua, El Salvador. Let them whisper in your ear, whisper gently. With your small, great owl glasses and Friday night songs. I saw you, bearded, fighting the dragon, stone in hand, furious poet in suspenders, I swear. Thank you. Lately, I've taken to doing the circumambulation of Mount Tamalpais. Anyone here heard of that? Yeah. So that was a tradition started by Allen Ginsberg and Gary Schneider and Philip Whalen. And Allen Ginsberg, like, they did it once, and then there was the human being in Golden Gate Park, and Allen Ginsberg like told people about it from stage, and then it became a big thing, and 100 people after that did the walk. Although, frankly, on the walk, some people say that after that, like 1,000 people did it in one day. I think that's apocryphal. But we continue to do the route that Allen Ginsberg did with Gary Schneider, stopping at the same places and saying the same prayers and the same chants. And we've made some slight alterations to it in the short time that I've been walking with them. We do it on the solstice and at the equinox. And I have this poem, and both Ginsberg and Gary Schneider talked about being a forest monk, which comes from the Japanese term yamabushi, like a wandering priest. And maybe Gary Schneider talks about it more in his work, but I name Allen Ginsberg in connection with that term because I feel like maybe a closer lineage to him. So this poem is called "The Consecration of Mount Tamalpais." I am a forest nun, have taken vows not of chastity, but of full body immersion, soaked through in an atmospheric river, peeling my underwear off like a wet swimsuit in the dark of the Muirwoods parking lot on the shortest day of the year. Not poverty so much as saying yes to anything without a timesheet or stock options, which is why I'm in sneakers with water collecting in the sleeves of my windbreaker. The trail around Mount Tamalpais goes through dry ochre hillsides and redwood tunnels of mossy air. It's 15 miles from where we start at sea level to East Peak. My training is a coffee shop, a grocery store. To build strength, I answer my daughter's questions. Are you going to die before me? When you die, can we get a dog? First, I carried her on my chest, then on my back. Now I hold her hand while she stops for each acorn, oat gall, and pine cone. I pile them in my pocket with the sticks and seed pods and this piece of paper. At the 1967 Human Bee Inn in Golden Gate Park, Allen Ginsberg urged everyone to do kitchen yoga, meaning to clean up. At an outcropping of green serpentine, we make a new vow: women, life, freedom. Translated from Kurdish and the protests in Iran, with women driving cars or showing their hair. Obedience, is that really a vow? How about wildness? Ginsberg saw this practice as being a forest monk. There's no female line, but I can start from now, expert that I am in kitchen yoga. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Judy. Let me have this book from it. Most of you know that I love to do giant visual books about the counterculture. And when I heard about this book, Better Books, it's the same concept, giant visual book. This particular book is looking at the counterculture in Britain in the 60s, centered around a place called Better Books, very much the city lights of London at that time, or Shakespeare and Company in Paris. There's 2 copies of this floating around near the front counter. Smart people will leave with it. That book was written by Rozemin Keshvani, who's an independent curator, writer, and archivist. She's the co-editor of the book I just showed you, as well as the author of several books on sculptors, including Gustav Metzger, Gary Woodley, and Warner Schreiber. She has studied Ginsberg quite a bit. We just spent a couple of days at Stanford University digging into Allen's personal writings and drawings. Rozemin?
Hi, thank you, everyone. It's a real privilege to be here and to be here with all of you to celebrate the 70th anniversary of the reading of Howl. It is so special. I can't tell you how special it is to be here. I want to tell you a story about Britain and the 1950s Britain that was really taken by the Beat Generation poetry and the incredible influence of Allen Ginsberg and actually City Lights Bookshop on the counterculture movement in Britain. And I think it's fair to say that if there hadn't been Allen Ginsberg, I think it's fair to say there wouldn't have been the transatlantic powerful movement that took place and that created the counterculture and the movement that eventually led to the hippie generation and the punk generation. Allen Ginsberg was seminal to all of this. And as people have already noted, part of what made that possible for Ginsberg and for everyone was his desire to always live as confrontationally to himself, as constantly to ensure, to make sure that he was aware of himself, learning himself, exploring himself, never saying no to anything. And that empowered him. And and everyone around him could feel that very deep honesty that you often saw. You know, why did Allen remove his clothes so often? Because he wanted to make sure that no matter how much he had accomplished, no matter how much he knew, no matter how much happened to him, he was always exposed. He was always there and ready to be exposed and affected by his existence, by the phenomenal world that was influencing him and that would be embodied in the word that he wrote. So I'm going to read to you a little bit from this book that I wrote, and I'll cut large bits out, but I want to talk about better books a little bit, and not so much about Howl, but I think that what really was the moment in the counterculture for Britain was when Allen Ginsberg came in 1965 after being kicked out of Prague. And that experience of having all his journals stolen, of having everything taken away from him, and of realizing what it really was to be physically accosted and removed and sent to England, had an effect not just on Allen, which you can hear about in that poem that he wrote, but also on everyone who then listened to the poem, experienced him. It really changed Britain. It galvanized the young people. In the 1950s and 60s, London was at the center of a transatlantically inspired cultural revolution, the impact of which would irreversibly shift and radically redeem the parameters of artistic and literary production in Britain. United in their distrust of culture, the emerging post-war generation of artists, poets, musicians, and writers were searching for new ways of responding to their alienation from the previous generation and the stifling geopolitical anxiety of the Cold War agenda. This generation was sitting on the edge of a post-war, post-atomic revolution, and their experiments ignited an explosion in conceptual art, performance, assemblage, and cut-ups, events, happenings, films, and expanded cinema. They dropped out to drop in, choosing not to change society, but instead to disengage from it through individual acts of rebellion, so as to create an alternative culture that reflected and responded to their concerns and experiences. As Jeff Nuttall, artist and author of Bomb Culture, wrote, "The underground happened everywhere simultaneously. It was simply what you did in the H-bomb world. If you were by nature creative and concerned for humanity as a whole." London's geographical location was key to the city's role in this counterculture revolution. Situated smack in the middle of the transatlantic route between New York and post-war Europe emerging from the wreckage of the Second World War, London became the focus for those hungry to participate in the burgeoning bohemian, artistic, intellectual trade route, inspired by the likes of beat poetry, hitchhiking, jazz, the anti-bomb movement, Vietnam, and post-war politics. It was better books. The bookshop opened by Tony Godwin in 1946 that really took this. Tony Godwin had just come out of the war. He had been serving in the war, and he came back from the war 26 years old, not a penny to his name, and wanting to do something really significant. And he opened a book, he bought a bookshop. He borrowed money, bought a bookshop at 9294 Charing Cross Road, which at the time was kind of the bookshop haven in London. And he wanted to create a bookshop that was a kind of he thought of it as a university. He wanted to create a bookshop where people came, met, read poetry, did different things. And he eventually connected with Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and they created a kind of counterculture book exchange. So Better Books became the center of this transatlantic route of ideas, exchange, small press publications, poetry that was being read, and he actually, Ferlinghetti loaned him some of his poets and said, okay, if you want to learn how to run a bookshop like this, you need to have Dick McBride come and work for you. You need to have Bill Butler come and work for you. And these are the young poets who then came to London and, spent 6 months to 2 years. I mean, Bill Butler, he eventually stayed and opened his own shop, Unicorn Books. But this is what happened in those days, where things were only being shared by telegrams, or things were being shared by dropping a letter off at a bookshop because you were trying to avoid the prying eyes of the state. Today, we don't even think about it. Today, we accept that. We say the internet, of course, it's going to be monitored. But in those days, we actually took our privacy seriously. We actually had something called privacy. So what happened? Better Books had become the hub for the poetry circuit, with regular readings and presentations from poets and writers, British poets, Bob Cobbing, American poets, Australian poets, Anna Lockwood, Henri Chopin, Pete Brown, Paul Buck, Jeff Cloves, Denis Gould, William Burroughs read there, Andrew Crozier, Paul Evans, Harry Fainlight, Alan Fisher, Adrian Mitchell, Jeff Nuttall, Dom Sylvester Huddard, Edward Lucy Smith, Tom Rayworth, Lee Harwood, Livy Houston, Anselm Hollow, Ernst Yandel. The list goes on. George Macbeth, Tom Pickard. And the shop also hosted the New American Scene and the Beat poets. Dick McBride, John Moore, Ken Rexroth, Gregory Corso was a staple there. Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Jack Hirschman, he spent many years there. Jerome Rothenberg and Allen Ginsberg, all read at the bookshop. And Allen Ginsberg's reading at the paperback shop at Better Books in May 1965 was the breakthrough event that eventually led to the Royal Albert Hall poetry reading. Ginsberg in 1965 had just been deported from Czechoslovakia after being crowned King of May. Eric Mottram writes, in his shabby clothes and tennis shoes, Ginsberg became a figure in Prague, the very embodiment of the revolutionary poet in any totalitarian society, capitalist, fascist, or communist. Therefore, during the Majalis, he was popularly crowned the King of May in honor of his clear anarchic powers. Ginsberg's diary, unfortunately, was quoted to prove his sexual licentiousness, his criticism of communism, and his hostility to any signs that human beings were being manipulated for any reason. The situation became complicated when Ginsberg's journals somehow got lost and allegedly recovered by a loyal worker who turned them over to the police. They were horrified by the political anecdotes and jokes that Ginsberg had collected, and also by the lists of his male lovers. After being followed and grilled by the police, Ginsberg was declared a corrupter of the youth and put on a plane for London. And so it turns out that an act of censorship had the opposite effect, because by sending Ginsberg to London and making Ginsberg so angry, the whole counterculture movement in Britain happened. Ginsberg knew of better books through Ferlinghetti. Bill Butler, he had already been carrying on a lot of correspondence with. He came looking for Bill in the bookshop. And who did he find? Bill had already left. He found Barry Miles. He told Miles he wanted to try out some new poems, which he'd only just composed on the flight from Prague to London, concerning his mistreatment by the Prague secret police. They had confiscated his journals and somewhat unceremoniously deported him from his country, evidently for his deviant sexual writings. And they immediately began organizing for Ginsberg to do a reading in the shop. The reading was organized by word of mouth and took place to a standing room crowd with Andy Warhol, Gerald Malanga, Barbara Rubin, and Eddie Sedgwick in the first row. Donovan prepared the crowd with his rendition of Cocaine Blues. Ginsberg became determined to organize further readings. And, you know, I've talked to many people who were in that Better Books, many of whom now are no longer with us, but who were in that room in Better Books and listened to the recordings. And it was electric. Ginsberg was on fire. And I think the British, you know, the poetry scene there, the poets and the activists and the writers who used to come to the bookshop they'd all heard of Allen Ginsberg. They perhaps read Powell, but they'd never seen anything like this, never experienced anything like this. And Ginsberg was determined to organize further readings, and he did. And he made Better Books his command center, holding court and organizing his affairs through the shop, which, as I understand, is something he often did in other places. Miles recalls that Ginsberg was seated around the coffee machine with him, his wife Sue, Dan and Jill Richter, and Barbara Rubin, lauding the success of the Better Books reading. And he just learned that a number of poets were in Europe. Gregory Corso was in Paris. Ferlinghetti was on his way to London. Wisniewski was already in London, and everyone agreed it would be amazing if they could all bring these poets together. Barbara Rubin apparently asked for the name of the biggest venue in town, the Albert Hall, of course. And she hired it 10 days later for a performance by the poets, £450. Ginsberg co-opted Alexandra Trocchi, whom he had known from New York, while Dan Richter, John Esham, Marcus Field, Michael Horowitz, and John Hopkins, Hoppy Hopkins, did most of the organizing for the now notorious International Poetry Incarnation. The event took place at the Royal Albert Hall on June 11th, 1965, to a sold-out audience of 7,000 and featured readings from 19 poets. Can we imagine that today? 7,000 people gathering together with flowers to hear 19 poets read at the Albert Hall, organized in less than 10 days. Gregory Corso, Harry Fainlight, Adrian Mitchell, Christopher Logue, Alexandra Trocchi, Ernst Yandel, John Essam, Pete Brown, Anselm Hollow, George Macbeth, Simon Vinkenug, Paolo Leone, Daniel Richter, Spike Hawkins, Tom McGrath, Allen Ginsberg, and Wozniacki, who apparently didn't read. Apparently, actually, Allen had to read for him. He refused to read. And, you know, amazing things happened at this event. Nobody knew what to expect. During the course of the evening, flowers were distributed. Weird paper mache creatures strolled about the aisles. Bruce Lacey's machine structures buzzed, shook, and flashed. The dry, eerie voice of Burroughs on a tape recorder. Davy Graham played the guitar. Poets and hecklers interrupted each other. And a girl in a white dress danced under a pall of pot smoke with distant gestures of a dream. And the last sight of Allen Ginsberg was one to cherish, as singing to his finger cymbals and shuffling like a wild-haired bear among the flowers hurled at him, he was surrounded by and finally disappeared in a mass of foliage waving enthusiasts. Perhaps most significantly, the event was a watershed, marking it as one of the first European-wide events in which the 1960s counterculture generation recognized themselves as bearing a shared, if yet indeterminate, identity through which they would create their future. Thank you.
I've been lucky to do quite a bit of readings and events in London over the last 2 years, and I can tell you that the English have more bookstores than we have, and they like to read a hell of a lot more than we do. Our next guest actually blew my mind with some of his earliest books centered around Kerouac. Denis McNally, the New York Times bestselling author, historian, lecturer, music industry professional, the author of Desolate Angel, Jack Kerouac, The Beat Generation, America. And you also co-edited Jack's book. Did you not? Oh, you did not do that. Okay. He's also known as the Grateful Dead's authorized biographer. He was also their publicist for many years. His most recent book is called The Last Great Dream, How Bohemians Became Hippies and Created the 60s. Denis McNally.
I suspect if I were organizing this, I would have set the sequence differently because I'm going to go, after all this wonderful stuff, in particular about the poetry incarnation and what Allen, the effect of beats. I'm going to go back and talk about the context of beat, what America was like when beat began. But first, with my tongue stuck firmly in my cheek, I would like to note that there's a name that hasn't been mentioned, and we all really ought to thank him. The man singularly responsible for City Lights and the success of Howl, Captain William Hanrahan of the San Francisco Police Juvenile Squad, who arrested Shigeyoshi Murao over there, and Lawrence the next day, I think. The finest publicist American poetry has ever had. Okay. Sitting there, I had to say that. In the summer of 1974, on my first cross-country trip to research Kerouac's life, which became my book, Desolate Angel, I interviewed Michael McClure. Now, by then, I was, 24. I was aware of imminently aware of the 60s musicians who had most immediately influenced me: Dylan, Jerry Garcia, Janis Joplin, David Bowie, that they, in fact, had been tremendously influenced by the Beats, by Kerouac and Ginsberg. So, of course, I had read On the Road in high school, and a couple of years later, I followed with a close reading of Howl. The two works were already part of my mental default setting, which centered on a recognition of the spiritual vacuousness of mainstream American culture and a laundry list of rejected assumptions: the idea of American exceptionalism, the disregard for the environment, the racism at the heart of the Constitution, so forth. So, given those assumptions that I already was carrying, I couldn't quite understand. I was still somewhat mystified by the sheer impact of On the Road and Howl. So I asked him, Michael McClure, why Howl and On the Road had such an amazing impact. And he smiled. I can still visualize standing across the room, leaning against the door jamb. And I said that, and he said, Denis, were you around for the 50s? I said, well, I was 10 when it ended, so, not really. He said, so he just left it at that. It was very zen, I guess. And his answer sent me, as a historian, or a budding historian, I would say, to studying the context of that decade. And by the time I was done, I had a fair idea of the point he was trying to make. You start with a devastating depression that just gutted the American economy and psyche, an all-encompassing war that involved enormous social organization, a Cold War infested by McCarthyism and loyalty witch hunts. All of these set the stage. In fact, the phrase McCarthyism is actually a kind of a misnomer because, pardon me, I threw in a good pun and then I just walked over it. McCarthyism is actually a bit of a red herring, as Eisenhower's own Executive Order 10450, which targeted gay people, nudists, and other deviants, was an even more successful instrument of repression, destroying thousands of lives. At least 10,000 people were fired from the federal government, mostly for gay issues and such, and maybe a few nudists. I might add that they're still ahead of Trump, but he'll try. There was a more subtle side to all that depression, and that's something that and I'm looking at this room, and I think so. The age range is a little, believe it or not, young to remember. For instance, in 1954, Eisenhower honored Abraham Lincoln's birthday, which was traditional, by attending a service in the Lincoln Pew at the in D.C.'s New York Avenue Presbyterian Church. The minister observed that there was no religious reference in the Pledge of Allegiance, which bothered him, and that the phrase "under God" had been part of the Gettysburg Address, which it was. Within months, Congress had passed a law inserting the phrase into the pledge. 2 years later, it replaced "E pluribus unum," which was the slogan, the motto of the United States, which, for those of you who don't remember, is "from many one," good one, as the national slogan. In fact, a vague Christianity, which Eisenhower directly connected to Americanism, had become official policy. Linked to an ongoing campaign that called attention to godless communism, the result was that, among other things, a majority of Americans felt that they would not permit a book written by an atheist to be in a public library. That's not to say that they were all cleaned out, but that's what they wanted. In part because what I would term a socialist law, namely the GI Bill, which my father greatly benefited from, which allowed veterans to buy homes and go to college, 50s America became the poster child for material prosperity, for the new, as one scholar listed them. And think about this. Almost everything I'm about to say happened only in the 50s. TV, hi-fi, frozen low-calorie and instant food, aerosol containers, garbage disposals, power transmissions in cars, and the entire field of synthetic chemistry. Don't start. All of which was beautifully, memorably summed up in one word in the film The Graduate: plastics. So long as one wanted to participate in all these wonderful material benefits, one behaved. And so the youth of the 50s became known as the silent generation. Now, there were two social phenomena that disturbed the stiff calm of the era. The explicit disturbance of the earliest civil rights movement was still fairly limited and fairly quiet, although really important. And rock and roll, which was often associated with the other thing, which was juvenile delinquency, soon vanished from the forefront because, of course, Elvis went into the army, Buddy Holly died, Little Richard turned to the church, and Chuck Berry was put in jail. Michael McClure was entirely right. The opportunity for diversity, for looking at the world in a wider way, was at ground zero. And then Howl and On the Road became the only pieces, and think about this, how important this is, in world history. And I'm open to correction. A lot of bright minds here. Feel free to stand up and tell me I'm full of it, or tell me after. But Howl and On the Road became the only pieces of avant-garde writing ever to connect with a mass audience, which says something about both the mass audience and the arts. Thousands of youth looked up and said, you know, the emperor's naked. And there was more to life than economics. Now, I'm sure most listeners know this here, certainly know the story of Howl. Allen had come to San Francisco largely at the invitation of his friend Neil Cassidy, but he had also found a really happening poetry scene centered around Kenneth Rexroth's salon and frequent public performances. One night he took peyote at his girlfriend's Nob Hill apartment and looked down on the fog-enshrouded Sir Francis Drake Hotel below him. Under the influence, he decided that the two windows, which to this day are still there, and as far as I can tell, are not used, it's blank, but they're these two things. He decided that they were the eyes of Moloch, the Hebrew eater of souls. And then, of course, some months later, he sat down at his typewriter, the first time he'd ever done that, actually. He always had written poetry by hand, and wrote, I saw the best minds of my generation. Later, a snarky, very snarky, critic complained that the characters in Howl were actually from New York, so that the association of the poem in Ginsberg with San Francisco was deeply flawed. I would say he missed the point, which is to say that Allen needed his stay both in Mexico, everything he had done since he had left New York, but in particular, his time in San Francisco, in a poetry scene that was very different from the one in New York, that without those things, the poem would never have emerged in the first place. The place of composition is highly relevant to any piece of writing, as I have in a, at this point, lengthy career of studying writers. Think about Mark Twain and his little writing cabin in Elmira, New York, where he wrote Huckleberry Finn. It's important, and certainly that's true of Howl. Without city lights, without Vesuvius and the place, without the Sixth Gallery and the San Francisco Art Institute, which of course was then the California School of Fine Arts, but anyway, don't quibble with me. Allen wouldn't have been the counterculture icon that you talk about, that we all know. And that would result in him joining Gary Snyder and McClure and Ferlinghetti and Lenore Kandel alongside the rock bands of 60s San Francisco on the stage of The Human Being. So a while ago, I was here at City Lights to celebrate the release of a vinyl version of Allen reading Howl. And I actually, the truth is that the person who was supposed to speak couldn't, Ann Charters, I think it was, she couldn't get here. Something happened, and the another person grabbed me and said, "You're talking." I went, "Oh." So I mumbled some stuff, and I because it was so last second, I didn't write down. I had one naturally great thought, which I didn't remember to say. Well, here I am, and so now I get to say it, which is this. It was so appropriate, of course, to celebrate a recording of Howl, because along with everything else that's important about the poem, and we could go on at much greater length than I, the reading of the Sixth Gallery marks a major moment in the history of performed poetry, spoken poetry. The oracular shamanic roots of Howl give it much of the mojo that the audience felt so overwhelmingly. Chanting is at the root of the sacred, and certainly it's at the root of Howl. And of course, it came from here, City Lights, which is a sacred place in the arts of San Francisco.
D.A. Powell is a poet and educator. He's the author of numerous poetry collections. These include Tea, Lunch, Cocktails. Those are 3 separate volumes. And Chronic from 2009, winner of the Kingsley Tufts Poetry Award, as well as 2012's Useless Landscape or a Guide for Boys, winner of the National Book Critics Circle Award. His latest book is called Repast. Is he here? Very well. Is he not here, Peter? Oh, okay. Well, obviously he's out to lunch, and he's had too many cocktails, or he's going across a useless landscape. So it's funny. I want to mention me. Peter Hale runs the Ginsberg Estate, and this gentleman I know is Marvelous Peter. We sort of collectively came up with a list of names, and we worried about having too few people or too many. And during one of our numerous Zooms, I believe I said something to the effect of, well, someone might not just show up, so let's invite 1 or 2 more people. So D.A. Powell, thank you from the bottom of my heart. I was able to squeeze in a few more others. Now, I was mentioning earlier, my not always the best person to pronounce names. You did coach me, Ma Shen Win. Okay. She is a poet and educator. She is the author of the poetry collection Score and Bone, Invisible Gifts, Storage Unit for the Spirit House, and Percussing the Thinking Jar. She served as the inaugural poet laureate of El Cerrito. I did not know El Cerrito had a poet laureate, but that's great. From 2016 to 2018. She's the co-publisher of Literary Cherry, editor of the Process Note series, and a co-founder of Maker, Mentor, Muse, a literary community. She teaches at the MFA program at the University of San Francisco. Thank you very much.
You. How's everyone doing? Yeah, you hear me? All right. Thank you so much to all of you for joining. Oh, do you want to?
Think they like this.
Oh yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, Peter, for inviting us. Thank you, of course, for organizing all of this. So I have a little story I want to share. I was 17 years old when I got my first copy of Howl given to me by my first boyfriend, who bought it here in this very bookstore, along with copies of books by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, Philip Lamantia, Bob Kaufman, and other poets. These books were transformative for me and inspired my young poet self to explore and dive deeper into poetry, music, film, performance art, and dance, and get into all sorts of good trouble over the years. And speaking of dance, I'd like to invite my friend Heather Bourbeau to do interpretive dance for this tribute poem for Howl. All right, Heather. Yow. I saw the best cats of my generation, deranged by hunger, stalking, maniacal, furry, prowling the alleyways and cul-de-sacs of El Cerrito, hunting for that abandoned bowl of kibbles. Feral feline stoned on catnip, drunk on dirty rainwater, loveless, lurking loners slinking through the dusky dawn, who arched their mangy backs, yowling under street lamps, hissing, growling, leaping, mongrels and mudcats in heat. Prophyllus sylvestris catus, O Animalia cordata carnivora, O predator of hummingbirds, reclusive panthers, mystical and alert, shedding wisdom and cat hairs, fierce gods and goddesses of the other world, who collarless and aloof pissed on the corners of San Francisco, hallucinating sparrows falling from the sky, sand cats, smoke cats, snap cats, contemplating. Pause. Let's give a hand to Heather. Hey. She's a cat. Yeah, and I would like to end with the footnote to Howl. Are you ready?
Lay on me.
Holy, 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 holy. The world is holy. The soul is holy. The skin is holy. The nose is holy. The tongue and cock and hand and asshole, holy. Everything is holy. Everybody's holy. Everywhere is holy. Every day is an eternity. Every man's an angel. The bum's as holy as a seraphim. The madman is holy as you. My soul are holy. The typewriter is holy. The poem is holy. The voice is holy. The hearers are holy. The ecstasy is holy. Holy Peter, Holy Allen, Holy Solomon, Holy Lucian, Holy Kerouac, Holy Hunky, Holy Burroughs, Holy Cassidy, Holy the unknown buggard and suffering beggars, Holy the hideous human angels, Holy my mother in the insane asylum, Holy the cocks of the grandfathers of Kansas, Holy the groaning saxophone, Holy the bop apocalypse, holy the jazz bands, marijuana hipsters, peace peyote, pipes and drums. Holy the solitudes of skyscrapers and pavements, holy the cafeterias filled with the millions, holy the mysterious rivers of tears under the streets. Holy the lone juggernaut, holy the vast lamb of the middle class. Holy the crazy shepherds of rebellion. Who digs Los Angeles is Los Angeles. Holy New York, holy San Francisco, holy Peoria and Seattle, holy Paris, holy Tangier, holy Moscow, holy Istanbul, holy time and eternity, holy eternity and time, holy the clocks in space, holy the fourth dimension, holy the fifth international, holy the angel and Moloch, holy the sea, holy the desert, holy the railroad, holy the locomotive, holy the visions, holy the hallucinations, holy the miracles, holy the eyeball, holy the abyss, holy forgiveness, mercy, charity, faith, holy flowers, bodies, suffering, magnanimity, holy the supernatural, extra brilliant, intelligent kindness of the soul. Thank you all.
I say, holy shit, that was good. I'm really glad someone actually did that. Thank you. Now, this next gentleman, I did an event here about 18 months ago for my book, Allen Ginsberg, Material Wealth. And Neely did his last event, his last public event with me. And before that, me and Neely and Peter Hale and Tate Swindell went out for some, what's the name of this Chinese restaurant that every City Lights employee must eat at? Yes, Brandy Hose. And so I bonded with Tate Swindell that night, and I found him to be a egoless, enthusiastic archivist, poet, photographer. He is the founder of Unrequited Records, which specializes in putting poetry records back on vinyl. He's the editor of On Valencia Street, Poems and Ephemera by Jack Michelin. He has co-edited the collected poems of Bob Kaufman for City Lights Books. He's the author of various poetry collections, including Palpitations, The Creation of Deadlines, and Photo Poems. His most recent collection is called Solar Hits. Tate, are you actually with us? I know you've been wandering the streets. Here he is. I love this fucking guy. Thank you, brother. Give me a hug. Bye, man.
Let's see this. Wait, how am I have to bring this up a little bit? I'll fuck up your mic here, Peter. Yeah, I'm gonna fuck it up. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Peter, for coordinating, Pat, everyone else, TV Land. I'm gonna get right into it. I'll riff on Howl a little bit, and just so y'all know, I referenced earlier. I said I'm gonna be Will Alexander free flying, so we're just gonna bounce around, but I won't take up too much time. So for me, Howl, part of Howl is the connection, and we all know Allen, helped the Beat generation by archiving, taking photos, promoting, cross-referencing the whole thing. It's been mentioned earlier, but I love how he name checks his friends in the poem. It helps with it. We know that Lou Reed's Walking the Wild Side name checked a lot of people, and Duchamp with Cornell and Man Ray and such. So via Allen, who I never met, but my brothers did. I met some great poets, influenced me a lot. That's why I'm here tonight. And I'm going to get to them. I'm going to read some of their stuff. Harold Norris, who City Lights put out this, Hotel Nirvana. Ronnie Burke, good friend of Elaine Katzenberger, who helped running this show. But I want to really quick mention this killer book that just came out. David Will's book, A Remarkable Collection of Angels. It's about the Sixth Gallery reading. It's about the history of the Sixth Gallery, and actually a pretty good history, a cultural and historical reference of San Francisco, putting everything into it. So anyway, catch this if you can. All right, I'm gonna jump right into Harold's poem from Hotel Nirvana. It's called We Do Not Speak of Love, and it's for Alex Gilardi. And again, speaking of connections, Alex was like a den mother for the a lot of the down and out poets here in the 70s and 80s. Bob Kaufman and Eileen and Parker lived on her floor. Jack Michelin stayed there, and she just connected a lot of folks. Her son John has been looking out for Parker for decades. We do not speak of love for Alex Gilardi. We do not speak of love, but are all pushed and pulled by it, taking all forms and shapes, twisted, pounded, burnt by it. Like sculptor's clay, our faces punched and pinched, made long or ripped apart by it. eyes pained or deep or lost, lines cut in cheeks and foreheads from it. We do not speak of love, our faces scream of it, haunt bars and sex-wild streets for it. We do not speak of love, but spike warm veins, pop pills, burst brains with alcohol for it. Gods and demons wrestle for the heart of it. I can't survive the lack of it. So via Ronnie Burke, a killer Chicano surrealist, a poet, activist, me and my brother met Harold Norris. Ronnie is just you'll learn about him. But I just want to jump right into one Ronnie's Dead Engines. Beneath the wheels of a locomotive, severed fingers, broken bones, ground to sugar dust, asphalt stones, hills of beer cans, and mountains of decomposing bodies. Beneath the wheels of a locomotive, three-eyed demons whirl, menacing tornadoes of destructive forces, world wars, burning cities, rust of junk cars and shards of piled up sheet metal spinning tombs of mass death. Oh, my ancestors, caught beneath the wheel of a locomotive. Uranium babies burn, napalm hauled to the breeding grounds of buffaloes, stampeding dust storms of idle machinery. So I really wanted to read a Diane poem, but I was saying, Patrick, like Diane, no offense, I love Diane and Shepherd, nice people, but they got a lot of love here. But through my brother Shelley and Diane were in the room when Ronnie Burke passed, and allowed him to have 24 hours freedom, their Buddhist faith kind of connecting them, and I really I think of Diane and Shepherd. Yeah, but I was saying something earlier, and I don't want to forget this out. I want to dedicate this reading to Shig, who was behind that counter when I realized this earlier. It was Ginzy's birthday. It was Ginzy's birthday when Shig got busted, and I just think of Shig and his family, who a decade earlier were in internment camps, and the messed up shit that's going on now, and how it's real in our face. Yeah. I want to read a Herbert Huncke poem, and most people don't know of Huncke's poem. They might know of his prose or his storytelling, but Jack Kerouac called him the greatest storyteller he knew. And some folks, if you know about Ginsey a little, you're going to know about Peter Orlovsky, right? People don't know about Peter's writing as well, which Bill Morgan put out a beautiful book, which I'll have here selected from Peter's journals. But I'm going to read this Huncke poem. It's for Peter Orlovsky. I just finished eating Peter and washed him down with beer, lager beer. He was tender and juicy, succulent, sugar-cured, and lean. I swallowed his heart whole, sucked his bones clean, leaving them in a pile neatly stacked marrowless. Of his hair, I'll weave a silken jerkin, a scarf to wrap around my throat and a sash. Of his bones, I'll build a bed, spend hours lying upon it dreaming, his skull a pillow for my head. The birds will come there and find me dead. They will peck me, tearing tiny morsels of flesh. Some will fly away, dropping me into the sea for fish. The sun will dry me out, and the wind scatter flakes of dust over the earth. Slowly, our bones will pulverize as we gradually become powdery. The rain blending us together, washed across the earth in tiny rivulets, seeping down to the roots of the trees, grass, flowers. They will find our skulls, the last to go, clasped jaw to jaw in caricature of a kiss. So that poem was important for me to read, just tying Howl all together, because Ginsey being queer and it being illegal to be queer at the time, and it's just there's a lot in here. The second stanza where he's calling out Moloch, which again we see here in prevalent SF and the world today. The Who with the Friends, and the third with Carl, and being in the Carl and Garrett Stern, who was in Rockwood in the same time. And just, Carl later on said that he saw, he throws the potato salad, and he sees Whitman as this revolutionary, this political revolutionary, and Ginsey saw him as a sexual revolutionary, and he took from that. So in Howl, you got those Whitmanic lines, but you got him talking about what his friends are doing, telling you all the stuff that's going on, which wasn't really in poetry at the time. So it's taking a chance to sell it here and take the stand. So once again, Lauren, Shig, everyone here for carrying it on. Yeah, there's a lot of there's so many threads that just come through, and I mean, I'm sorry if y'all don't know the like Charlie and Plymell, up in Cherry Valley still, Gerard Malanga. It's Pam's mother that the reason that City Lights published Golden Sardine. She found the satchel. Sylvia Beach and Claude Pellew, again, Francis Ronnie Burke. There's just this kind of really, really cool thread and connection, and it just continues today, And I don't want to limit just to literary folks, I mean, there's connectors that do it in all sorts of ways. I mean, Jeanette Etheridge across the street, what Tosca did, Specs, the Leochi family here, like there's just a lot of people keeping it going, and everybody here showing up, and Pat continuing to coming up and doing events, and just Peter Hale, the Ginsey estate. That guy couldn't be cooler and better at just helping someone like me find stuff, connect to stuff, agree to let me do things. He just, Peter's just incredible. All right, I'm gonna I could keep going and going and going. I'm not gonna take it all night. So I'm gonna wrap up with one of my own, and you'll hear some more folks. But it's it spilled out one day many years ago, as some of the good ones do. Like my poem from Meltzer just spilled out, and it's beautiful when that happens. It's called "Sit Down and Write a Poem" for Ronnie Burke, the Crazy Fox of April 1st, 1955. Sit down and write a poem, a fierce poem, an endless poem, a poem to evoke emotions in us all, a lyrical poem, a surrealist poem, a communist poem, a poem with pigeonholes, a poem tumbling outside of the sandbox, baking in the sun, served for lunch. A Plymell poem, a Micheline poem, a poem that sounds like the horns of Ornette Coleman, Art Pepper, Wardell Gray, a flock of sunny dizzy birds, the drums of Shelley Mann, Billy Higgins, Elvin Jones, and all their notes floating in the air, a poem that breathes, a poem that tells everything but the truth, a poem that makes you righteous with anger, a poem that is blamed for burning down banks, picking locks of buildings and hearts, a poem that is deemed illegal for centuries until the day forgiveness comes knocking, armed with pockets full of cash bundled in red tape, a poem that has never heard the words war, gun, rape, racist, homophobe, starvation, God. A poem that contains no medical benefits, a poem that cannot afford medical benefits, a poem that feeds on words taught society as useless, a poem that writes poems, a poem that uses words like cock, cunt, clitoris, fucking, a ghost poem for the reverberations of Bob Kaufman, the laughter of Ronnie Burke, the wit of Andre Cudrescu, the lust of Lenore Candell, the memory of Herbert Hunke, the visions of Ira Cohen, the well-being of Diane DePrima. Sit down and write a poem. Thank you.
So as I mentioned earlier, if you could all forgo Starbucks for 5 continuous days and bring your sweet succulent asses up to that front counter and buy a copy of Howl or one of the other books about Ginsberg, it would be wonderful. I'm going to leave us with a short poem by Jack Michelin that seems to sum up America in 2025, even though he wrote this at least 40 years ago. I want to run up to strangers and kiss them, but there is too much noise. Men kill each other. I'm sick and tired of seeing sad faces. Stop that bastard machine. Everyone is God and holy. Thank you and good night.